Chapter 6. Emma wasn't always so quick on her mental feet, but she'd executed a nice two-step that time. She'd managed to tell Aidan the exact truth and restore her sense of dignity in one fell swoop. Nice work if she did say so. Mixed. No matter. He knew where she stood, and that was a safe and sane. A fear of flying didn't make him any less manly or yummy, but it did make him human. Under the seat in front of her. Now would be a good time to flip open her. Done sitting next to Aidan's hunky self, but he wouldn't know whether she was. Best of all, he wouldn't be inclined to start a conversation while she was. But the good news was that it cut both ways. After booting up her computer, she had to come up with something to type and decided she might as well brainstorm ideas for her next book. She'd never change an air pressure, the noise, or the smell of jet fuel to flying in order to save the heroine from something or other. Maybe she was a bush pilot in Alaska. That worked. She could crash land in a remote area. She'd have to teach the hero werewolf how to fly, or she'd be forever stranded there. Distracted by Aidan sitting next to her, she was inspired by his solid. Aidan had taken out his computer too, and was looking through some files. One quick glance told her it was some sort of spreadsheet. At some point she could get a glass of juice anytime. She liked having room to work on a laptop. Smelled as good as Aidan. About rich people as well as middle class and poor people. Hanging out with. Supple, with a light dusting of hair over the backs. His nails were neatly trimmed, maybe by a manicurist. He had no cuts or scratches on his hands, and his cheeks were perfectly shaved too, and his hair trimmed as if he had it. Rich, or at least this rich family, appeared to be well groomed. Like what you see? His cheek creased in a smile. That's okay. He glanced at her. My ego loves it. Laughter danced in his golden eyes. The PC word is wealthy. Because if you use rich to mean that someone has a lot of money, what can? Decadent. There goes my diet. She loved talking words, but she didn't meet too many men. How about intense? The conversation was becoming something of a turn-on. For her blood, he'd countered that she was too rich for his. Now that comment. Exceedingly rich. Plain. I'm getting a real craving here. But alas, they soon discovered the galley wasn't stocked with cake. 5 for that cake. To a radio interview. There's no cake time in there. Sure there is. You'll have your cake and eat it too. But you don't have to. He gave her a slow smile. You're with me. Breath to respond. What do you mean by that? Feel like Cinderella at the ball. But that pretty much described her situation. She could fight it and him, or she could sit back and enjoy the second option made more sense. But she'd have to be careful not to enjoy. If she drew him into another conversation, he might forget that they were in a. Oh yes. His hair. I never asked my research question, she said. You. It. His quick grin told her she'd hit on a subject that amused him. You mean? Of scissors and a blow dryer. Our offices. Right, but we rent out most of it, and one of the tenants is a top-notch. What about your fingernails? Him to let go of the armrests. And teeth. When he'd lifted his hand, she'd noticed his watch. Is that a Rolex? Thousands. $. She gasped. No, then she glanced at him to see whether he was kidding. Nope. It was a birthday present from my folks, so I don't know the exact. You'll see why it costs so much. There's a calendar on it as well as a lunar phase dial and the. Oh, for heaven's sake. Take it. You said you wanted to do research on how this. Because we value the workmanship and the tradition of watchmaking. At least. One of my kids. Her heart. It was just a little pang though, because he was so out of her. Into the sink when the garbage disposal was running. No kidding. You do realize you could get a Casio which would do most of this stuff. She handed it back to him with great care. It's very classy looking, but then it should be for 800 large. Her mother had given her a watch for drawer because her mother had given it to her. That's the sort of thing I need to know for my research, the things a rich I would you do with it? Alongside people like Barbara Streisand. Then I'd get her a country home in upstate New York where she could spend her vacations. You don't think that would be too extravagant? He asked the question as if. He smiled. Would you buy a Blancpain watch? That's the best time I've ever had on a plane, Emma. Thank you. He stared at her a moment before starting to laugh. That would be. No, because of my fear of getting stuck permanently in an airplane bathroom. That would be a negative. He was definitely teasing her. Then how are you ever going to write about it? With a werewolf, you know? All that different from Theo, the 19-year-old kid who'd emailed her. Aidan had read her sex scenes and was convinced she was hot stuff in bed. The kind of mindless ecstasy she wrote about. She wasn't even positive it existed in the real world. She could tell him that she used her imagination. But he had sense enough to know that they came from completely different. They'd have nothing much in common. She wouldn't feel at home in his. But now he was in Chicago, a city full of luxury options. She thought about, a car and driver will meet us at the airport and take us wherever we need to go. He looked wary. We'll be at the Palmer House instead. Feel to old money. The penthouse. It was available. You can consider it research. Traveling in the pumpkin coach this weekend. She might as well relax and enjoy the ride. Chapter 7. Aidan switched on his phone while they were still on the plane and called the car service. While the flight attendant helped Emma with her coat, he gave the whatever it took. He wanted a single serving of chocolate cake from one of Chicago's best bakeries to be waiting in the town car by the time he and Emma reached it. Yes, he was showing off, and yes, he should cut it out. But he around. Just checking to make sure the car service is on time, he said. They wouldn't dare be late, would they? Away. No, but it doesn't hurt to give them a nudge. Getting off the plane took a while, and Aidan was grateful because the cake wasn't going to be an easy trick. He expected one person to be waiting with a request. In any event, a chauffeur holding a sign printed with the name. Aidan approached the man, who was a short, compact guy of about 45. He handlebar mustache. Of that when they shifted. Aidan didn't pick up any werewolf vibes from the chauffeur, so apparently Aidan's secretary had gone outside the work community. Off the plane. That meant Theo hadn't somehow found out Emma's flight. Show up all weekend, but Aidan doubted that. The chauffeur gave him a firm handshake. Barry Dinsmore. Welcome to Chicago. Computer case as if it contained the secrets of the ages. Aidan had noticed her typing up a story idea on the plane, so in a way the computer could be more valuable to her than gold. Wait. Emma stood rooted to the floor in the middle of the stream of passengers. I have checked baggage. Someone? But I don't. She looked uncertain. It'll be fine, Emma. I promise you'll get your luggage. He flicked a glance in the chauffeur's direction. You can handle that, right? Produced her ticket envelope with the claim check stapled to it. You can't. Miss, which one is mine? At least I don't think you can. It's orange, but I've... Orange. Got it. Have a lime green ribbon tied on the handle to make it even easier to. Aidan tried not to shudder. This was why he'd wanted to take the corporate. A snob for those thoughts, so he kept them to himself. I'll remember that, ma'am, the chauffeur said. First I'll settle you both. Emma turned to Aidan as they trailed after the chauffeur. What about you? You don't want to know. When we get to the hotel. Hanging in the closet. Of course they are. She threw up both hands. Why didn't I think of that? Give yourself time. Aidan was struggling not to laugh. You'll get the hang. Crazy. Here's the thing, Emma. By traveling with me, you'll be safer than you would be if you traveled by yourself. That's part of the security service. While you're in Chicago, where this Theo character lives. Trust me. He'll know. One of the tactics will be letting him think you're engaged to me. Something to say about it, don't you think? If we were really engaged, you'd have everything to say about it. But this is a security measure that has nothing to do with reality. All you have to do is... She walked in silence beside him, her back rigid. Emma, will you roll with this concept or not? Weekend this way. New York. He'd been trying to figure out how to tell her and had hoped he could do it over cake. Not long, he said. Until just recently I was still working out the details. She stopped so quickly a man behind her almost ran over her. He muttered curses as he swerved around them. Are you telling me you're making this up as you go along? Refining it as ideas come to me. At first I thought being your media escort would be the perfect cover, but then I realized Theo wouldn't be put off by a media escort. A fiancé, though, is another story. As I've said before, Aidan, I don't need all this firepower. Chances are we... It. Barry turned around with a questioning glance. Mr. Wallace? Will you and Ms. Gavin be coming with me then? It all sent shivers of awareness through his system, but they needed to get moving. We'll talk more in the car. Like the fake engagement idea. I realize authors aren't front-page news, but If there's even the slightest chance word could get back to my mother, then. No, and I don't want her to. She has a tendency to be overprotective as it. Me twice a day. That's tapered off some, but if she thinks I have some cyberstalker on my trail, she'll camp out in my living room for the duration. I love her to death, but she could make my life a living hell. About to spend the weekend at the Palmer house with a werewolf. So that means she doesn't know I tagged along for your Chicago leg of the book tour? Either. Just asking. He broke the connection between them so they could each navigate the revolving door leading outside. Announcement and telling her I need you as a bodyguard on this trip would make her assume I got rid of Doug because you and I are lovers. What a disaster that would be. You know what I mean. I'm not sure I do. He handed Barry his computer case, and the chauffeur loaded it and Emma's case into the front seat of the town car. I'm just saying that it would be bad enough if she thought we were lovers. We're not. Well, I can't even imagine the fallout. I can see the problem. And he did what had seemed like a brilliant plan during the plane ride now looked less than brilliant considering how Emma's understood the tricky nature of family dynamics. The Wallace pack had its share of issues. Followed her in and noted the interior of the car smelled like chocolate. This trip was becoming more complicated by the minute, so he hoped that at least. I can't believe this. Emma stared at the silver tray Barry settled on her lap. In the center sat a large wedge of chocolate cake with dark chocolate crystal. Considering how the trip had gone so far, she'd be willing to bet it was. An ornate silver fork lay on a linen napkin beside the plate. Your luggage. That won't work. She glanced over at Aidan. He can't leave the car parked. Trust me, we won't be ticketed. What do you mean? Of course we will. Or worse yet, we'll be hooked up to a bribe someone. Not necessary. Barry propped the sign with the Wallace name on it in the front window. She looked at the front windshield and sure enough that placard was leaning. Or something. Aren't you going to eat your cake? She gazed at the piece of cake, which had those clever curls of shaved chocolate on the top layer of frosting and one perfect red strawberry nestled in the curls. A strawberry in February. I won't end up with it in my lap when he starts going 80 on the outer drive strip of her lap that wasn't covered by the tray. I'm sure nobody will ticket. Flag suction cup to the car. No way. Where? I most certainly did. Emma picked up the heavy silver tray and handed it to him. Hold this. I have to see the flag. Tasteful at about 9 square inches. Because there was no breeze, she couldn't see the crest clearly, but it was definitely a family crest. Very funny. I'm sorry. She looked over at him. That was snarky, and you don't deserve snarky when you went to all the trouble of getting me that cake. You're right. She slid back down to her seat and refastened the shoulder harness. Thanks for holding my cake. She took the tray and felt the brush of his fingers against hers. Jing. She was aware of him all over again. But she picked up the ornate fork, which looked as if it came out of an antique set of silverware. Eating in front of you feels very rude. Don't worry about it. I'm not a chocoholic. She sliced down through the moist layers. Are you implying that I am? Then I might as well confess. Coffee and chocolate are my two favorite. Good. MMM. She savored the taste and decided it might be the best chocolate cake. Rich. That made her laugh. Yes, and moist and decadent too. It's a crime to eat a dessert like this fast. A person should take her time and draw out the pleasure. He glanced out the window, as if searching the sidewalk for Barry and her suitcase. Then don't. Even if Barry does 80, we won't get to the interview for a while. Yes, but I'd like to get to the interview without chocolate smeared all over myself. Aidan made a funny little noise in the back of his throat. She glanced over at him. Is anything wrong? Are you hungry? I'm fine. But he didn't look fine to her. He looked sort of feverish. And the backs of his hands, had they always been that hairy? Maybe she'd been so fixated on the watch she hadn't noticed. He was a manly guy who probably had lots of healthy hair on his chest and his legs. He might even have hair on his back, although she hoped not. That was a turn off. As if that mattered. She wasn't going to be seeing his naked back, so whether he had hair growing there was a moot point. About that time Barry arrived pulling her orange suitcase. When she'd bought it, she hadn't been worried about whether the suitcase was stylish. Her goal was to own a suitcase that didn't look like every other one circling the belt. In baggage claim, She'd succeeded in that goal. Neon orange with little pink hearts on it. She hadn't wanted to mention the little pink hearts when she described the suitcase to Barry earlier, and after all, the predominant color was orange. Very orange. Your luggage is here, Aidan said. Kind of hard to miss seeing that. She took another big bite of cake. I'm afraid I left my Louis Vuitton at home. He turned to her and smiled. Fortunately, his eyes had lost that feverish look. You don't have any Louis Vuitton. As Barry loaded her suitcase in the trunk, she scarfed down some more cake. It was a darn shame to gobble a cake this fine, but she didn't trust herself not to make a mess. Barry climbed behind the wheel. All set. Ready to roll back there. I still have cake, Barry. If you can avoid quick lane changes while I'm finishing it, I'd be most appreciative. I'll do my best, Miss Gavin. He pulled away from the curb slowly. Barry, are you going to be our driver for the entire weekend? Yes, Mom, Then please call me Emma. I have a feeling we'll be old friends by Sunday. Barry's smile was reflected in the rearview mirror. That would be nice. Either. Only met a couple of live authors before. Met any dead ones? Barry chuckled. Good comeback. No, I haven't met any dead ones, but I have a friend down in New Orleans who swears he has. I like New Orleans. It's a great town. She looked over at Aidan, thinking to include him in the conversation she'd started with Barry. There. She took another good-sized bite of cake. No. Wallace Enterprises contributed quite a bit to the rebuilding effort. You should go sometime. The chocolate cake was improving her mood by leaps and bounds. It's sort of spooky, but then I enjoy spooky, as you can imagine. Considering the books I write. You mean pretend spooky? Well, yeah, I guess so. It's fun to scare yourself a little with imaginary things. She dropped a glob of chocolate frosting, which landed on her napkin. Fortunately, next time it could land on the front of her turquoise suit jacket though. She studied the situation and decided she'd do better if she picked up the plate and held it closer to her mouth. She had about a third of the cake to go, and Barry had promised to drive carefully. Damn it. Barry swore at the same moment he slammed on the brakes. Sorry about that, Emma. But this jerk in front of me cut me off. That's unfortunate, Barry. She put the empty plate back on the silver tray. Because now I'm wearing. Chapter 8. From the moment Emma had mentioned getting chocolate smeared all over herself would pay dearly, she'd managed to get both cake and frosting all over the front of her turquoise suit jacket and the white lace camisole underneath. Worse yet, it was smashed into her cleavage. The fantasy picture of her naked and smeared in chocolate had somewhat come true, but not in a good way. The erotic overtones were all there with no whammy. She glanced down at the mess before looking over at him with a bemused expression. Then she began to laugh. That made things worse. If she'd ranted and raved about her ruined outfit or place, he'd have been able to bury his cravings under the weight of her anger. But no, she'd chosen to be a good sport about it, and he was a sucker for her cleavage. He might not be a big fan of chocolate. A rare steak was more his idea of a treat. But if he could be allowed to clean that chocolate off her breasts using only his tongue, he'd take that assignment in a heartbeat. Just his luck that wouldn't be happening. Still, he had to help her figure out a stream of apologies despite Emma's amused reaction. Reprogram your GPS and take us to the nearest Nordstrom. Cancel that, Barry. Emma gulped air and sank back onto the seat. No. Shopping trips. I have something in my suitcase that will work fine. I just need a plan for changing out of this and into that. Aidan shook his head. No. Yes, Aidan. A gas station restroom will work fine. He grimaced. But it might be cramped and... He gestured dismissively. And dirty? It might, but you don't have to go in there, and my sensibilities. Probably wipe some of the cake and frosting off. Otherwise I'm liable to get it on the upholstery, and then it'll spread everywhere. See, because he proceeded to take what he wanted, spreading the chocolate. I'm afraid the napkin's compromised, and I don't have any tissues in my purse. Do you by chance have a pocket handkerchief that wasn't hand-sewn by Swiss nuns? Pulled out a monogrammed handkerchief. I'm sure the Swiss nuns would approve of using it to aid a damsel in distress. As Barry would say, nice comeback. She took the handkerchief. Thank you. Wow, this is really soft material. It's woven from the hair of sacred llamas cared for by extremely devout. She grinned at him. Okay. I'll lay off the smart remarks. It's just He should concentrate on the intricate workings of his watch, Rourke's watch. Woman. He didn't know whether she was moist yet, but she would be if he could. This gas station looks as if it might be halfway decent, Barry said. If it's not, we'll go somewhere else. It'll be fine. Let's stop. Emma unfolded the handkerchief and glanced at the Phelan. It's a family name. A family name that meant wolf. Instead of giving first names that reference wolves, the Wallace pack chose to give. Nothing subtle about his wolf self right now, though. He was ready to howl. Barry pulled the car up to the convenience storefront, located beside the gas pumps. I'll get your suitcase out of the trunk. Great, thanks. You know what I hate about this the most, Aidan? She picked up a glob of icing from her cleavage and licked it from her finger. He had to look away. His chest had begun to itch, and within 30 seconds, bathroom, but it'll take more than a quick rinse to get the chocolate out, I'm afraid. When he looked to his right, he was presented with the image of some guy shoving a gas pump nozzle into the tank of his car. Aidan had never thought of that behavior as particularly sexual, but in his present mood it didn't take. Barry opened the door on her side. Do you want to take the whole suitcase? While I'm in the bathroom? Sure. He took the heavy silver tray gladly. Maybe its weight would hold down his growing erection. Interview. We'll make it, right, Barry? You bet we will, Mr. Wallace. You can call me Aidan. He smiled. We'll probably be old friends by Sunday. It's already starting out to be an interesting gig if you don't mind the back. Sorry about that sudden stop. It was that or crash into him. It's not your fault. It's really mine for ordering the cake delivered. Aidan vowed to be less ego-driven and more practical for the rest of the weekend. Turned out well. Except for the last part, of course, when she slapped the No, but in spite of it all, Aidan cherished the memory of Emma glancing over. From inside his suit coat pocket his phone vibrated. He took it out and looked at the readout. Rourke, who no doubt wanted to know why in the hell Aidan had ignored all his warnings and headed out to Chicago with Emma. Someone from your office in New York Express shipped that flag over. Barry. Car all weekend. Aidan was so used to the flag that he didn't think about it anymore. It'll keep you from getting tickets long before without getting one. The Wallaces must have some influence. We have business connections with the Henderson family. Barry's eyes rounded. The Henderson family? The one that owns a chunk of? I believe so, yes. That explains a whole hell of a lot. Pardon my French. But the Henderson name. Aidan decided he might be wise to enlist Barry in the cause. He leaned forward. There's something you need to know. What's that? Every family has a troublemaker. Has more than one troublemaker. Is it the Wallaces or the Hendersons with a bad egg? The Hendersons. His name is Theo and he's 19. Barry rolled his eyes. 19. The perfect age to cause problems. The thing is, he might try to make contact with Emma this weekend. Him. That's the lamest pickup line I've ever heard. Is that what she writes about? He claims to actually be one. He has an angle. I'll be on the lookout, but it wouldn't hurt for you to be watching too. Aidan pulled a picture out of an inside pocket of his suit jacket. This is his high school graduation photo. Barry gazed at the wallet-sized picture of a gaunt young man with dark hair and eyes. His expression was more of a sneer than a smile. What do his? That's where it gets tricky, Aidan said. I'm hoping to neutralize the friends of my father's, and he'd rather not embarrass them by exposing their son as a kook and a potential stalker. Lots of luck with that. Barry shook his head, which made his handlebar mustache wiggle. In my experience it all comes out in the wash. But I'll being bothered by some nutcase. No offense to your friends and their kid, of course. None taken. He is a nutcase. And I intend to shut him down. You like her too, don't you? Aidan decided the chummy conversation needed to be dialed back a notch. She's. Barry obviously picked up on his tone. Sure. I understand. And I'll do. Aidan looked toward the convenience store as Emma came toward the car pulling her orange suitcase. Barry hopped out and took it from her. She still wore her black trench coat, which had miraculously not been baptized. Sweater and gray slacks. Aidan liked this outfit as much as or better than the turquoise suit she chose. She'd look like someone he wanted to strip naked and take to bed. That was damned inconvenient. She smiled as she climbed back into the car. No big deal. I'm going to take Advantage of your pull in this town to get my turquoise suit clean so I can make that happen once we get to the hotel. I'm sure you can. She fastened her shoulder harness as Barry pulled the car. Right now it'll come in handy. Want me to hold that tray now? That's okay. I'll be in charge of it. She brought her unique scent into the car with her. As his loins stirred in response, he settled the tray more. Johnson in check. I checked out your flag and your family crest before I got back in the car. Okay. The creatures on the crest look something like wolves. Crest because wolves were usually seen as noble animals. She gazed at him. Is that one of the reasons you picked up my books? Because your family's crest has wolves on it. She nodded. I've always had a thing for wolves myself. That's why I was drawn to the werewolf concept. Sometimes I wish they did exist, although I'd want them to be like my werewolves and not the way they're portrayed in some books like ferocious beasts. So why did you decide to portray wolves the way you did instead of going? I studied wolves in college back when I thought I might go into wildlife. Werewolves shouldn't be that different. That's if they were real, which they aren't. Right. He couldn't ever remember being so tempted to blurt out the truth, revealing the existence of werewolves so he could hardly blow the packs. Cover himself. Oh, I have your handkerchief. She opened her hand, and it lay in the center of her palm in a soggy gray ball. I tried to wash it in the sink like I'll take it. He picked up the wet handkerchief and tried to think what the front pocket, it would soon leave a damp spot. Finally he decided to drop. Because it was woven from the hair of sacred llamas cared for by extremely devout monks. I made that up. Half my wardrobe, so you can't simply throw it on the floor of the car. He gazed at her. Sure I can. That's wasteful. Emma, you're going to have to get over yourself, at least for this weekend. I mean that we're about to stay in a penthouse that would easily house an entire village in some third world country. We'll be the only two people in there, but I'll probably turn the heat up to at least 72 degrees, thereby contributing to global warming and the depletion of fossil fuels. In addition to my unconscionable use of resources to heat those 11 rooms, I intend to take long hot showers because I love those, especially in the winter. And if there's some sort of jacuzzi arrangement, which I would expect, but I'm not sure, I'll be filling that tub and using those soothing jets to massage. And a devilish urge made him forget his common sense. If you hate the idea of all that water for one person, you're welcome to join me. She flushed. You and I both know that wouldn't be a smart idea. Maybe not psychologically, but when it comes to sharing resources, that's frustration level grow. But she was so juicy. He'd known she would tempt him, but he hadn't factored in her overwhelming succulence. She looked adorably righteous, but that didn't detract from her desirability. Research. Then you'll want to check out all the amenities. Breakfast in bed, champagne in front of the fireplace, your favorite movies on the flat screen, along soak in a bubble bath. Her eyes narrowed. Lecture you about wasting resources again this weekend. Good. But you may not have as much time as you think to lounge in the jacuzzi. Have you checked the schedule? I glanced over it. Then you might remember that I have signings and interviews through this evening and all day tomorrow and tomorrow night as well. This is a book tour, not a pleasure trip. Perhaps you'd rather stay at the Palmer House while I think not. Then good luck with your resource-wasting plans. He sighed. She'd bested him. He resented the way she dinged him about his accommodations could provide. Instead of falling for that, she'd reminded him of his duties and insinuated he was nothing more than an idle rich boy. That wasn't true. He worked hard, but he played hard too, and he hadn't allowed himself to do that recently. Obviously, he wouldn't be indulging in any playtime with Emma though, and that was the wisest course of action. Unfortunately, she wasn't tempted by the possibilities, but he sure as hell was. Chapter 9. After this, you're sold out. I'm sorry, Emma called out. I can sign book plates for those of you who weren't able to get the actual book. She put down her pen and flexed her fingers. This kind of success was gratifying, validating, ego-boosting, and down earlier tonight. Front of her earlier today. She hadn't even seen the inside of the hotel let. Hopping from her radio interview to a TV gig at WGN, to a cocktail reception put on by a local library to this book signing, would remain a memory forever. Bloomed in her active imagination the moment she accidentally smashed the cake. onto her chest, and thick, creamy frosting had worked its way between her. It warmed to her body temperature. Life didn't get much better than that. Only one thing would have improved the sensation: having a man like Aidan lick. In the back seat of the town car. He could help her out. She seemed to have chocolate smeared all over the place, which Aidan had helpfully opened to the title page. "I'm sorry." She glanced. Autographed. She snagged her pen and poised it over the page. Theo, but she'd felt Aidan stiffen at hearing the name too. Emma decided to get this over quickly. She'd written to Theo when the girl. Emma had a bad feeling about this. "I'll just say thanks for your support." Emma started to write, but the girl laid a hand on her arm. Ignored the lines. The message said, "I'd love to meet you." Is very limited. And writing that would indicate that I plan to. Just so he can show his friends, you know? It's harmless. Aidan stepped closer to the table. "I'm sure it is, miss." Minute. He rounded the table. "Let's go over by the coffee shop." "You'll get the book," Emma said. She closed it and scooted it to one side as she greeted the next person in line, a young mother holding a sleeping baby. Last person left with a bookplate in hand. She pulled Theo's book over and "Wishes, Emma Gavin," and closed the cover with a snap. That was that. Aidan returned with Terry, who was sipping on a coffee drink, which Emma iced. Emma could easily understand that look. When Aidan turned on the charm, imagine that a message in a book could turn into a legal thing. Emma shot Aidan a puzzled glance. He was her assistant now? And what legal? He nodded wisely. Anything's possible in this lawsuit-happy climate. "I'm not. Theo's not the most stable person in the world." "When you didn't. I guess his folks could sue for emotional damage or mean a wealthy family. Hang out with Theo because he has money, but I don't. I hang out with him because he seems lonely." Shift and handed it to her. "Thank you for understanding that I couldn't. Anything else while you're in Chicago, you have my number." "I appreciate that," Aidan said. "It's good to have contacts in an unfamiliar. Actually, I'm a little rusty." "It's a nice thought, but I'll be pretty busy helping Emma get through the book tour." "Thanks anyway." Emma almost choked. Emma decided she was supposed to be in charge, so she stood. "We have to. I'll take care of it." Aidan all but saluted as he walked away. Terry's eyes rounded. "He's gay. Totally straight." She shook her head. "Bummer. Well, good luck with the rest." "Thanks." Emma watched to make sure Terry left the area before she began gathering her coat, purse, and the remaining book plates. As she was wondering, when she read the text message, she laughed. "Yes. We are at main door. Need me?" She hesitated only a second while she entertained the idea of needing Aidan. She probably did need him in many ways, but she wouldn't indulge. She texted. "Sold out of books, huh?" Shaggy black hair needed a trim, and his jeans and gray sweatshirt looked as. A squiggle of uneasiness settled in her tummy. "Yes, I'm afraid so." She still had her BlackBerry in one hand, feeling a little foolish in case she was of the store, and she showed me what you wrote. But looks like I get to meet. So you're Theo. She prayed that the BlackBerry picked that up. She didn't dare take her eyes off him to check for other people around. It was late and, "That's me." He smiled, and his teeth looked very white and very sharp. Into points. She kept telling herself he was only a 19-year-old kid, but dark eyes. Shivers down her spine. He stepped closer. "Did you get my emails?" "So you're the one who sent those." "But they're pure fantasy. As we all know, there's no such thing as werewolves." Her laughter sounded about as nervous as she felt. Aidan to show up now. She didn't care whether he claimed to be her. Convince her he was a werewolf. This isn't fake. Theo held up his other hand, which was also covered with, down one of the aisles. He'd been gone about 2 seconds when Aidan arrived, panting. Missed him. The same way Theo had before taking off down the same aisle. Emma wondered whether she'd fallen down the rabbit hole. The kid had looked somewhat unwashed, but she hadn't been able to actually smell him. Maybe to keep away from him because catching a cold in the middle of her book tour. She did as she was told, though, and waited by the signing table for him to come back. After about 10 minutes he did, but he didn't look happy. He got away. Missed seeing him come into the store. He gazed at her. "I just should have seen him, that's all. It's part of my job, and I wasn't doing it effectively." "Hope it is." "I hope so." Aidan didn't sound convinced. "Give me your coat. We need to get." "Okay." She allowed him to help her with her coat. After dealing with Theo, she wanted to snuggle against Aidan as he slipped it over her shoulders. Forward. I'll feel better once we're locked inside the Palmer house. Backs of his hands, and I don't know if he's filed his teeth, but they look really wicked. Aidan cursed softly under his breath. The store. I didn't want to do that, but the kid may be a danger to himself. And others, and, well, me. I'm not sure what the police could do. This point he hasn't actually. Was just playing along with the way readers of vampire books show up wearing herself inside the safety of the car, but she forced herself to walk. Hello. Hello, Emma. He glanced at Aidan. Catch him. No, he got away. Damn. Hot pastrami on rye in downtown Chicago traffic. She buckled herself in, but her thoughts were focused on the hot pastrami and, Jenny might have mentioned that you liked those. Or it was in that. She was safe, and after the encounter with Theo that seemed more. She turned her head to look at him. Apparently so. I still don't quite get. Who loved the idea of an alpha male? Lobster. She thought about it and couldn't work up any enthusiasm for a big meal at this hour. It was almost 10, and she had to be up at 7. The sad thing is that with all the running, I'm not really hungry anymore. Maybe just some wine? Champagne. Wore an $800,000 watch. Champagne gives me a headache. Much, but I'm a little tense and that should relax me. Instructions. She heard the name of the wine, some high-priced brand she vaguely remembered. From a movie. It probably cost several $100s a bottle. She didn't. Wonderful. When he returned to New York and she flew on to Denver, the party would be over. For now she was still doing research. At some point she should write down the name of the wine so she could use it in a book. What's that? She ached all over from the constant pressure of being sociable for hours. She was essentially a hermit, but a book tour required her to be on much more. That electricity needed to heat the water, and how very wasteful a jacuzzi was. She should really take a quick shower instead. But that wouldn't help her with her research. I say that sounds great, she said. But just to be clear, you can't join me. Don't worry. Chapter 10. An hour later, Aidan paced the living room of the penthouse while he talked to Rourke. He ditched his suit jacket and rolled back the sleeves of his white dress shirt. Emma was deep into her jacuzzi experience and had her cheese tray and a bottle of Lafite Rothschild in there with her. He doubted she'd be popping out to hear his conversation. Still he kept his voice down. Rourke, who had no such restraints, was yelling into his phone. You're an idiot. Not according to my test scores. Which are nullified by your testicles, apparently. I knew you had solid brass ones, but this is arrogance taken to the max. Calm down, Rourke. Here I thought we had an understanding, and then I check with Dad and find out you're on the damn tour with her after all. What's wrong with you? Bro. When it turned out to be a Henderson, I thought that I'd be the best one to fuck it up? That's my analysis of the situation, for what it's worth. You were thinking with the wrong part of your anatomy. You're in the penthouse of the Palmer, aren't you? It's safe. He stared into the flames of the gas fire dancing on the marble hearth. The lit fire was part of the turn-down service. I figured if it's good enough for the President of the United States, then it's got enough security. For my purposes. Yeah, I'm sure security is the main appeal. Absolutely. Aidan glanced around at the sleek penthouse furnishings, predominated by a black and white color scheme. There weren't enough plants to suit him, but otherwise it worked. The windows presented a view of city lights and of snow that had just begun to drift down in big fat flakes. I stayed there once, and the jacuzzi is all gilt and mirrors. Is she in it yet? Maybe. Well, I hope to hell you have the good sense to stay out of there. I will. He'd been trying not to think of Emma naked in that jacuzzi. The maid had lit about 20 candles in the room, and Emma had been entranced. She hadn't been able to change into the hotel robe fast enough. You step one foot in there, Aidan, and you know what will happen, he said. And worse yet, if for some reason you get interested and nothing comes of it, you have that little genetic problem to deal with. Aidan blew out a breath. You don't have to remind me. I'm fully aware that I have that problem and you don't, dickhead. At least you're only a couple of blocks from the park, in case you start shifting and have to work it off. Aidan's slight disability was a sore spot, and Rourke knew that, damn him. Aidan was older, but Rourke was free of that particular gene, and he liked to flaunt the fact. Rourke, let me ask you something. No, I have never slept with Britney Spears. She wanted to, but I said no. It's not about your sex life, which I find vastly boring. It's about your watch. How much do you think Dad paid for it? Close to $1 million, I guess. Why? Jealous. You know, a family could get a really nice house or a great condo for the same price as that watch. Rourke sighed. That's not the point. Fine craftsmanship is disappearing, but it still exists in some areas, like watchmaking, for example. You could argue that watchmaking is an art form. Your watch and mine are like one of the Renoirs or Picassos the family owns, except we can wear them, which is actually more useful than something that hangs on the wall. I suppose. Aidan had been debating the watch question all day, but he felt artisans who make things like intricate watches and intricate blown glass and fine wines. Aidan asked hopefully. He just dropped a bundle on the one. Emma was drinking in the jacuzzi, and in case she saw the bill at some point, he wanted to be ready with a justification. Absolutely. Fine wines and precision automobiles and sleek yachts. These artisans need patrons, just like in the Renaissance. Without people like Dad and Mom supporting them, the artisans of the world would have to abandon their years of apprenticeship and dig ditches. I seriously doubt that. Maybe not ditches, but you get the idea. Without patrons, many amazing creations wouldn't exist. It's our duty to make sure the culture continues in all its facets. Thanks. You're the scholar, so I figured you'd be the one to give me the rationale. Rourke chuckled. I take it Emma disapproves of your watch. We had a discussion about it. Discussions are good, bro. That means you're not getting horizontal. Keep it in your pants, okay? That's always been the plan. Aidan didn't appreciate being lectured to by his younger brother, and it was becoming something of a habit with Rourke. I don't have to tell you that Dad's nervous about the relationship between the Wallace and the Henderson packs. No, you don't. Oh, and I'm pretty sure Nadia knows you're in Chicago. You'll need to at least pay a quick social call. When am I supposed to do that? Maybe Sunday before you fly back. Aidan groaned. I'll do my best. His attention veered from the phone call as Emma padded out into the living room, carrying a balloon glass full of the Lafite Rothschild in one hand and the half-empty bottle in the other. She was all pink skin and gold ringlets, and she was smiling. This is great wine, Aidan, she said. Later, Rourke. He disconnected the phone and turned to Emma. Glad you like it. I'm not even going to ask you how much it was. Good, because making wine is an art that needs to be supported by those who have the means. I guess. She walked over to one of two sofas that faced each other in front of the fireplace. The sleek Scandinavian frame was covered in black leather. In any case, I started feeling guilty drinking it all by myself. I'm sure this penthouse must have another wineglass somewhere. I would imagine it does. She held out the bottle. Then have some with me. I discovered I don't really want to drink alone. He could imagine what Rourke would say about that plan, but Aidan thought he could handle it. Whatever the maid had added to the water in the jacuzzi clung to Emma's skin, disguising her scent. I'll get a glass. Having wine wasn't the worst idea in the world in another way. He walked into the large dining room and over to a cabinet where several goblet choices hung by their stems. Alcohol tended to mute his genetic problem, so he might actually become less aroused by sharing the wine with her. Then he came back to find her curled up on the end of the sofa nearest the fireplace, her bare feet tucked under her and the hotel robe representing the only barrier to touching her warm body. His chest began to itch. But he had the goblet in his hand, and changing his mind now would make him seem indecisive. He shouldn't care what she thought of him, but he cared more than he wanted to admit. Now he had to decide where to sit. Rourke would advise him to choose the sofa opposite her, which put a brass and glass coffee table, plus a couple of heirloom quality vases between them. But Aidan figured that would make him seem like a coward, and besides, the wine bottle was on her side of the coffee. So he walked over to where she was sitting, eased down onto the smooth leather at the opposite end of the sofa, and reached for the wine bottle. He must have been paying more attention to the slight gap in her robe than to what he was doing, because he bumped the wine bottle instead of grabbing it, and it started to go over. Emma gasped and leaped toward it. She never would have made it in time, but he did. His many were gifts included reflexes that made his sudden movements a blur, even when captured by the fastest camera shutter in the world. his. He and Rourke had tested it. Aidan caught the bottle before a drop of Lafite. Rothschild spilled. Emma took hold of it a split second later. Still clutching it, she stared at him. I've never seen anybody move that fast. I have good reflexes. There was nothing wrong with his eyes either. Her wild leap from the sofa to catch the bottle had loosened the tie holding her bathrobe closed. He had a perfect view of her creamy breasts. Her nipples, soft and full from the warmth of her bath, were the color of a rose. He longed for just one taste. If she hadn't recently immersed herself in a commercially produced bubble bath, he would have been aroused beyond all reason by the temptation of that open robe. He would have taken her right then and there. No power on earth could have stopped him, other than her refusal. She wouldn't have refused. When Aidan was in full command of his sexuality, no woman had ever said no. But the aroma of flowers did nothing for his libido. He was operating completely on visual stimulation, which didn't stir his sexual needs nearly the way her natural scent would have. Yet he was stirred. His mouth grew moist and his cock stiffened. Oh, sorry. She released the bottle and pulled her robe together. He had a brief glimpse of her soft nipples tightening before she blocked his view with thick terry cloth. Whether her nipples had reacted to the air or his glance he couldn't say. Her cheeks were pink, but that could be from embarrassment as well as desire. I should have put on clothes instead of the robe. She avoided his gaze as she tightened the sash. I brought pajamas that cover me from head to toe, but after that wonderful jacuzzi, I wanted to snuggle into this robe. So thick and soft. She looked up. But it's completely opaque and I didn't think. I didn't mean to be seductive, Aidan. At least I hope I didn't. His tailbone ached, and the backs of his hands prickled. He had two choices. Kissing her thoroughly, and not just the quick peck she'd given him on Wednesday night would temporarily stop the process. If he fooled his body into thinking it would eventually get what it wanted, his shift could be delayed indefinitely. He might even be able to put it off completely. Yet that seemed like such a selfish route to take. On the other hand, if he didn't kiss her, he would have to leave the penthouse and surrender to the shift somewhere in the middle of Grant Park. He'd be forced to strip down outside in the snow and hide his clothes somewhere they wouldn't get stolen. He didn't like those conditions worth a damn. But he'd brought it on himself. He should just swallow his pride, head for the park, and accept that Rourke was right. He'd been an idiot to think this would work. Taking off his watch, he laid it on the coffee table. He'd never worried much about it before, but she'd made him more aware of losing it. I'm going out. Out where? For a walk. Her voice rose in alarm. Without your watch? Are you planning to go someplace where you'll be mugged? I won't be mugged. I just would rather not take a chance on losing the watch. He wanted to leave without wearing his topcoat, which was one more thing that could be swiped while he was in wolf form, but then she'd get even more suspicious. He opened the foyer closet and took out his topcoat. Aidan, you can't leave. She hurried over to him, her bare feet whispering seductively on the carpet. This is because I flashed you, isn't it? You're afraid you'll do something you'll regret. He shrugged into his coat. Or something that would be unfair to you. What's that supposed to mean? You said it yourself on the plane today. He chose his words carefully as he buttoned the coat. We're from different worlds, yet we're inconveniently attracted to each other. If I acted on the impulse I have right now, I'd be doing it with the knowledge I was only using you for sex. Yes. He met her gaze. For sex.
Pure, unadulterated sex.
Nothing more. She swallowed. You deserve more than that, Emma. So I'll go for a walk and get myself under control. You'll be safe here and I won't be long. Maybe an hour or so. He started for the door. Wait. She caught his arm. It's snowing out there. He glanced down at her hand on his coat sleeve. Such a soft small hand to wield such immense power over him. No problem, he said. I like the snow. So do I. Let me get dressed and I'll go with you. He couldn't help but smile. That would defeat the purpose. I'm trying to put some distance between us. You need to stay here. Her grip tightened. So do you. He made the mistake of looking into her blue eyes and seeing the hunger there. He gave her as much truth as he dared. Emma, you don't know me at all. I know enough. I know that you're the kind of man who would rather walk off his sexual urges than take advantage of a woman he has no intention of making part of his life. It's what any decent. That's where you're wrong. Actually, you're wrong about a lot of things. You say I deserve more than pure, unadulterated sex. In the long run, when I choose a life partner, that's true, but I can't think of anything I'd like better tonight. She gave him a saucy look. For research purposes, of course. Lust speared through him, and as he stood there fighting it, his pelt began to grow. You want to find out how the wealthy do it? Could be. We have sex the same as everybody else. Somehow I doubt that's true of you. She moved around in front of him and began unbuttoning his coat. You're much stronger than I am, so you can shake me off and go out that door if that's what you really want. He clenched his jaw as his teeth began to ache. It's not about what I want. It's about what's best for both of us. She finished unbuttoning his coat and slid her hands up the front of his shirt. Maybe unconsciously I wanted to seduce you by wearing only this robe. She gazed up at him as she lightly massaged his chest. You intrigue the writer in me, Aidan, but you fascinate the woman in me. There's something of the animal in you. She was on target with that one. He hoped his chest hair hadn't curled up past the open neck of his dress shirt. He had about 10 seconds before the buttons would pop from the strain of his growing pelt and the powerful muscles forming beneath it. He had to go now. I want to undress you, Aidan. She unfastened the first button. You're so masculine, so you do have a lot of chest hair.
So soft, so sexy.
Too late. He'd hesitated, and now he'd never make the lobby in time. He had one option left and he hoped it would still work for him. I need to kiss you, Emma. He cupped the back of her head and slid his arm around her waist. Hold very still. Aidan, your teeth are so white and so. He used what little control he had left to lower his head and kiss her gently. Easy now, light pressure. He could only tease her mouth with his because if he kissed her fully he'd draw blood. His canines were sharp enough. She was so innocent, so trusting. Dear God, he hoped he hadn't waited too long. If he shifted now, in front of her, she might never get over the shock of it. What if he still craved her after the shift? Would he take her while he was in wolf form? He'd never been in this precarious position before. It was uncharted territory. But he wouldn't shift. As she kissed him back and pressed her sweet little body to his teeth stopped aching, and his canines began to retract. His tailbone no longer bothered him either. The insistent pressure he'd felt there had moved forward and now affected his cock. Women were used to that phenomenon. In fact, they seemed to enjoy making it happen. As his shift gradually reversed, his lust grew stronger. Her natural scent had begun to filter through the fragrant oils from her bath, and he fumbled with the tie of her robe, impatient to remove it and sniff every inch of her naked body. His topcoat was in the way, and he released her temporarily, still keeping contact with her luscious mouth as he shrugged out of his coat and dropped it to the floor. Freed of that burden, he worked her out of the robe. Yes, at last he could stroke, touch, fondle. He buried his nose in the side of her neck and breathed in as he ran both hands over her quivering skin. She was smooth, warm, moist, rich, so rich. The scent of her drove him to nuzzle her breasts. He'd learned that kisses could disguise his real purpose, which was to breathe in every delicious aroma rising from her body. The more he caressed her, the sweeter she smelled. He trailed kisses down between her breasts as he absorbed every tantalizing fragrance along the way. Dropping to his knees, he cupped her bottom and kissed her navel, but his goal was the downy patch of blonde curls just below, where the musky scent of arousal called to him with a siren's song. When he reached his destination and breathed in her essence, he growled low in his throat. She trembled but didn't resist as he sought her out with a swipe of his tongue. She tasted as he'd known she would, like the nectar he'd dreamed of all his life and never found in either wolf or woman. He needed more. Come down. Bracketing her waist with both hands, he guided her to her knees, then onto the thick carpet. Her breath came fast. Aidan, there's a perfectly good bed. He didn't want a bed. Urging her legs apart, he settled down on the carpet and slid both arms under her hips. Then he took her, burying his nose in her fragrant sweetness and using his tongue to lap, to caress, to arouse in ways that were guided partly by human instinct, partly by the wolf that lay just under the surface. She responded like the wild thing he'd always suspected she could be. He'd read her books, watched her dance. He'd sensed the sensual creature waiting to be turned loose. He gave her that freedom by holding nothing back, by making low urgent sounds deep in his throat. He bid her to writhe in his arms, arch toward his ravenous mouth and cry out for more. He made her come once, twice, 3 times before she sagged against the carpet, panting, her body limp and quivering. The smell of sex filled his nostrils as he suckled her gently, easing her back from the last shattering climax. His shift was in retreat because he'd fooled his body into thinking relief was at hand. If he'd been in wolf form, it would be. But he'd pleasured her as a man, which meant he had to follow human rules. That meant pretending that he had to avoid pregnancy, kissing his way back up her moist skin. He gazed into her heavy-lidded eyes. "We need room service." She frowned. "Never mind." He feathered a kiss over her lips. "You'll see." Reaching for the robe that had fallen to the carpet, he pulled it over her and got to his feet. A phone sat on a nearby end table. Picking up the receiver, he punched the button for the front desk. "A box of Trojans SAP," he said, and replaced the receiver. A muffled sound made him turn toward Emma. She had a hand over her mouth, but she was definitely laughing. Crouching beside her, he tossed aside the robe and lifted her into his arms. "Go ahead and laugh. Some of us still have business to take care of." "But room service?" He carried her toward the master bedroom. "That's how the wealthy handle these things. I hope you're rested up because I have plans for you while we're waiting for those Trojans." Chapter 12. Aidan had caught Emma's scent long before she'd rapped on the door of the bedroom he designated as his from the outset. When her scent threatened to too deeply, even a faint whiff of her could tip the delicate balance he was struggling to maintain. So far, he hadn't become aroused enough to initiate his shift, but it wouldn't. He'd been during that tense moment in the foyer when he'd nearly shifted right in front of her. If he allowed her to arouse him again, he'd have the same. Because he'd chosen this bedroom originally, his clothes hung in the closet. Once he'd locked himself in here, he'd pulled on sweats and a t-shirt that, fortunately, she'd left quickly. Had she stayed even a minute longer, he might romping through Grant Park tonight. The risk of discovery was huge. Apparently he'd made a gross miscalculation as to the effect she'd have on him. Usually sex with a woman, or a female werewolf for that matter, left him shattering orgasm. His craving for her had returned. Because it had come on him so quickly, he doubted a second round would have. He had only himself to blame for the problem. He'd foolishly surrendered to an overwhelming need to take her in semi-wolf fashion, something he'd been warned. Neither of them had been on all fours, the position had been close enough to. It was a powerful and dangerous combination, one he'd learned of during the private sex education classes every young werewolf had to attend upon reaching reasonable control over his or her carnal desires by keeping a strict separation between animal copulation and human sex. That was easy for Aidan when he was in werewolf form. He and his she-wolf choices abounded, and he was a highly sexed male who loved variety. So, there were many interesting positions, so he'd been careful to avoid taking a belonged with Wers, and the pack spread across North America would be safer. If it stayed that way, human females had always been classified as an occasional indulgence, one that carried the added danger of exposing the entire Wer population, while she was on her hands and knees, even lacking the intention of binding, level that would be almost impossible to break. But all was not lost. He still might be able to override this lapse in. He wasn't quite clear the best way to do that. Logic told him he shouldn't have any more sexual contact with Emma, but she wouldn't understand why, and he wouldn't be able to tell her. Maybe if they had sex, but only in the indulgence, one he could give up when that became necessary. She wasn't in that category now. Thinking of giving her up depressed the hell. Laughing out loud when she pertly told him to go to hell. But her intelligence and sense of humor weren't the most compelling reasons he wanted Emma Gavin. The reason was far more basic than that. Her scent drove him. And breathing in all her enticing aromas, he was hooked. He needed advice, but he wasn't about to call Rourke. Either he'd wake his wouldn't be in the mood to discuss Aidan's options, especially considering Rourke completely disapproved of this bodyguard project. think better in wolf form, and by doing that he'd guarantee he wouldn't lose the battle and head into Emma's room. Its own kind of release, and maybe in wolf form he'd find wisdom. He sure as. The door was locked and the penthouse was quiet. If he had to guess, he'd say Emma had crawled into bed and fallen asleep immediately. She'd had a tiring females that contributed to a good night's sleep. He quickly removed his clothes and stretched out on the bed. Then he turned to form that was, in the mature werewolf, supposed to be entirely voluntary. Aidan had always resented the genetic defect that caused his involuntary shifts, but he was proud of his ability to shift on command, provided the necessary focus for his attention. As he concentrated on their easy descent, the shift began, because he wasn't resisting it as he had when he was with Emma. The sensations caused pleasure rather than pain. Within, rolling to his side, he gave room for his tail to grow until it became a muscles and sinews of his arms and legs transformed until he became an animal, capable of leaping a 6-foot wall in a single bound. But there would be no dramatic leaping and running tonight. Instead he paced himself from head to tail. He cherished this wolf form when he could choose it, instead of having it thrust upon him in a potentially dangerous situation. City, he couldn't see any of those things, and certainly not in this hotel room. Yet he padded over to the window and looked out because the outdoors was his element. The window glass reflected a majestic wolf with silver-tipped fur and deep-set golden eyes. His kind nearby, perhaps on the street below. Instantly his whole body tensed. In his wolf state he could communicate with otherworse, but only through the. He tossed the first volley. Who goes there? Friend or foe? A friend to worse. A foe to all who would enslave us. Shit. Toe. What in hell are you doing here? There in the penthouse with Emma. Aidan sighed. Get this straight, Theo. Your little game is over. You're.
No.
And she won't. Liar. You'll reveal yourself because you want her. Aidan wanted to draw him out, challenge him, subdue him. Are you calling me a traitor? You're taking chances like one. Care to come down and settle this now? Coward. Guardian. Silence greeted that statement. Then came the response. Because you want her. You're guarding her for yourself. Aidan left the window and paced the bedroom as he deliberately shut down his senses. But Theo's accusation echoed in his head, despite the fact he guarding her for yourself. That couldn't be. He would mate with Nadia or someone of equal stature in the Wer community. Emma represented, as his sex education instructor had said, a temporary princess. He would have no other. That was the werewolf code and he would abide by it. A yearning to see Emma filled him, but if he changed back to human form, that silent on the thick carpet. Turning the lock took several swipes of his large paw, but eventually it gave way. He scratched at the door until it swung open. He hesitated. Going to her now was reckless, but he needed to see her, needed to know she was okay. Surely. Lights glowed in the living room because no one had turned them off. The gas in each other to douse the fire. As a wolf he could remember what he'd done with Emma while in the form of a man, but the memory didn't fill him with lust. He no longer desired her, but he would protect her with his life. Were on, casting their light over Emma, sprawled diagonally across the big bed. Her blonde hair fanned out over the pillow she cradled in both arms. She was partially covered by the sheet and a section of the black and white comforter. Then, whimpering in her sleep, she turned onto her back, dislodging. To Aidan's dismay, his scrotum tightened and his penis thickened. In his sexual desire for a woman while in wolf form, it seemed he'd altered something basic in his physiology when he'd taken possession of Emma tonight in that. But he was not ruled by that change. With one last glance at her creamy breasts he turned away. As he started out of the bedroom, her scream caused him to whirl and face her. Had Theo managed to break in? And stared in terror at the thing that had frightened her. Him. Shit. He bolted from the room and dashed into his bedroom. Panting Then he closed his eyes and focused every fiber of his being on changing back. She'd stopped screaming, which meant she'd called the front desk. It would take them time to get here. He had maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. Do it, Wallace. Ease into the new body, sort of like slipping into a warm jacuzzi. Shifting fast was like leaping into a boiling cauldron, but he could do it. He clenched his teeth against the shock, but in less than a minute he was the door when hotel security arrived. Chance you have a dog in here, sir? Asked the skinny one. We had a report of a dog. Actually, the lady on the phone said it was a wolf, which would be entirely against hotel regulations. We figured it had to be a large dog, but Aidan opened the door. You're welcome to look around, but there's no dog. It was a wolf. Emma stood in the living room wrapped in the hotel robe. Aidan glanced at her. Emma, I think you must have had a nightmare. I did not. There was a wolf in my room. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. A huge wolf with silver-tipped fur. Search the place. It's probably hiding somewhere. A search, gentlemen, but I guarantee you won't find anything. Miss Gavin writes books about werewolves, and she has a very active imagination. For the first time doubt flickered in Emma's blue eyes. But I saw it, Aidan. I'm sure you thought you did. He went to her and gathered her close, careful. Not to make it a sexual gesture. She wouldn't be in the mood, but he seemed to always be in the mood. It seems so real. Asleep and something wakes you up like the heat going on. You're pulled right out of your dream, and for a moment you see something that isn't really. I wasn't dreaming about wolves. At least I don't think I was. Who's trying to make you believe he actually is a werewolf? She slumped against him. I suppose you're right, but Aidan, I've never been. Well, it wasn't. It was a werewolf, aka me. Couldn't find anything, ma'am. The chubby security guard came back into the living room. Ed's making sure nothing's in any of the other rooms, but we checked everywhere. Opened all the closets, looked under everything, checked. I'm so sorry, Emma said. I hate that you went to all this trouble for a silly nightmare. The security guard smiled. Don't think a thing about it. Part of the job. All clear, Ken. But if you have any more problems, ma'am, give us a call. We're up all night anyway, and checking for wolves in the penthouse is a lot more interesting than anything on late-night TV. About this and make it into a good story, but right now it's just embarrassing. This is nothing, the guard named Ken said. You wouldn't believe the things we get called for. We had a magician whose bunnies and doves all got loose. Took us 3 hours to corral them. For your time. No problem, Ken said. Lock up behind us. I will. Giving Emma a squeeze, he crossed to the door and threw the dead bull. Aidan, I feel like such an idiot. You've been under a lot of pressure. I guess. She gave him a pleading look. But I really don't want to go back in there by myself. He'd figured this was coming, and the next few hours would be torture. But thank you, Aidan. But we're not having sex. Well, that's one of us. He turned off the fireplace and the lights in the living room before following her into the master bedroom. The scent of her drew him like a moth to a flame, but he would resist. With luck, his head. Chapter 13. Emma slept the rest of the night curled against Aidan's strong body. At his request, she'd put on her pajamas, and he'd left on his sweats and t-shirt. She couldn't remember sleeping more soundly in her life. When she woke up, it was with a sense of something missing. Gray light filtered through the crack between the drapes, and as she came fully awake, she realized what was missing, or rather who. Aidan had left the bed. The spot where he'd been was still warm, and she rolled to that section and sniffed the pillow. She still couldn't identify the brand of his subtle aftershave, although it had a hint of musk. Maybe today she'd ask him the name of it. In the meantime, she had to get cracking if she expected to make the drive. Time radio interview at 8:15. She climbed out of bed and headed for the master bath. Water was running somewhere in the suite, but Aidan had left the master bath to her. Just as well. One peek at him in the shower and she'd jettison her morning appointments. That thought brought her to a dead stop in the middle of the bedroom. Good Lord. Would she really behave that unprofessionally because she wanted to have sex with Aidan? Probably. And that was unnerving as hell. She'd worked too hard to get to this point in her writing career to jeopardize it for sex with a man, any man. But especially this one. Aidan had made it clear that they could hook up, as he'd phrased it, but never have a more long-term commitment than that. Had she allowed one fabulous night of sex with a talented lover to sidetrack her completely? So shame on her. She'd do well to get her priorities straight. Striding purposefully into the bathroom, she pulled off her pajamas and turned on the shower. She moved through her routine quickly and efficiently, determined to focus on what was important, namely promoting night shift. She couldn't blame Aidan for her lack of dedication, though. He'd resisted her all along. The man had been prepared to walk for an hour in Chicago's freezing cold rather than take her to bed. She'd asked him to stay. Apparently she couldn't handle the heat, though, so she'd best keep out of the kitchen. If one night with him had affected her so strongly, she'd be wise not to repeat that behavior tonight. Time for some old-fashioned self-control. When she returned to the bedroom after showering, washing her hair, and using the blow-dryer, she noticed a tray on the dressing table. It held an insulated carafe of what smelled like coffee, a cup and saucer, a small pitcher of cream, and a piece of chocolate cake that looked almost identical to the one she'd smashed into her turquoise suit yesterday.
No eggs, no fruit, no bramo fim.
Nothing that would have been good for her. Which was exactly the way she liked her food first thing in the morning. Some men might have taken it upon themselves to provide her with what she should be eating, but Aidan had chosen what she wanted instead. Damn him anyway. Why did he have to be the perfect man? Other than his extreme wealth, of course. But without that wealth she wouldn't be enjoying top-notch room service in the penthouse of a very expensive hotel. His money was part of him, and she hadn't exactly been suffering as she'd enjoyed the luxuries he provided so far. Still wearing the hotel robe so there would be no chance of messing up her outfit with chocolate cake this morning, she sat at the dressing table and poured herself a cup of coffee. She could devote 10 minutes to this indulgence, which should inject enough caffeine into her system to get her through the radio show. Can I get you anything else? She turned to find him leaning in the bedroom doorway dressed in slacks and another snow-white dress shirt open at the collar. Her wayward glance went to his belt, and warmth settled between her thighs as she remembered unfastening it, remembered the heft and feel of his cock, remembered how he'd tasted. Oh, he could get her something else, all right, but it would be worse for her than chocolate cake for breakfast. She toasted him with the coffee cup. You're aces for having this brought up. Thanks for not assuming I needed protein before my big day. I've been paying attention. He looked relaxed, leaning there with his hands shoved in the pockets of his slacks, but lines of tension bracketed his mouth. Listen, Aidan, about last night, the wolf thing? No problem. No, not the wolf thing. She looked into his caramel-colored eyes. Funny, but his eyes were the same color as the eyes of the wolf she'd imagined standing beside her bed in the middle of the night. Whoa, had doing it doggy style made her dream about him as a wolf? He sighed. We should probably talk about that, but I don't want to make you late. On the other hand, it isn't the type of discussion I want to have in front of Barry. Let me go first. She knew for certain he was about to tell her they wouldn't be having sex anymore. She wanted to be the one who said that. It was a matter of pride. All right. We can't have sex anymore. It's too distracting and I need to concentrate on my book tour. He looked decidedly relieved. I understand. Of course you do, you rat fink. If I hadn't called it off, you would have. How dare you give me the best sex of my life and then decide we should be abstinent for the rest of the weekend? But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she smiled at him over her coffee cup, even though that smile took all the willpower she had. It was fun, though. Thanks for a good time. She knew it was a smart-ass comment, but he'd been ready to dump her, so she felt justified. He rolled his eyes. That sounds like something you'd write on a public bathroom wall. The eye roll irritated her more than it should have. On some level she acknowledged that he looked way too good leaning in the doorway, and she still wanted him, which wasn't a good idea. But you'd never see it if I did. Because you avoid public bathrooms. Damn it, Emma. He pushed himself away from the door frame. I'm sick of your remarks about my money. Maybe I'm sick of being reminded every 5 seconds that you're richer than God. Oh, excuse me, that would be wealthier than God. My mistake. Are we fighting? Yes. And it's about time. Think of it as class warfare. You're not exactly poor, Ms. Bestseller. He pointed a finger at her. You can afford a loft apartment in the village, and that's not cheap. She lifted her chin. I like living in Manhattan. I'm closer to my publisher. I doubt that's the only reason. I think you like the prestige of that loft. And you may ride the subway, but that turquoise suit has a designer label on it. What are you doing snooping through my suitcase? You said you wanted it cleaned. I came to get it while you were in the shower. Oh, thanks. She sounded ungracious, but it was tough to be grateful when he was withdrawing access to the one thing that intrigued her the most, his sexy self. Because of my name on the hotel registration, you'll have that suit cleaned and hanging in your closet by this afternoon. I appreciate that, Aidan. I'm sure you do. It's a pricey outfit. Dolce & Gabbana, if I remember right. She should have figured he'd have an eye for labels. How do you know I didn't get it at Goodwill? Did you? Well, no, but some of my clothes come from there. Anything you brought on this trip? That's beside the point. He sighed and glanced up at the ceiling. You're right. We're arguing about nothing. She couldn't stand it any longer. Although she'd acknowledged her reasons for staying away from him, he had his own reasons for staying away from her, and not knowing those reasons was driving her crazy. Taking a deep breath, she faced him. I need to be clear about something. If I don't get an answer now, it will bug me forever. He looked wary. About what? Yesterday you implied that we couldn't expect to have a relationship. Leaped on that and started complaining about your money, but I never gave you a chance to explain. Why couldn't we have a relationship, Aidan? She hated the longing in her voice when she said that, but she couldn't take it back. He gazed at her for several long seconds, as if considering his answer. You'll probably think this is medieval. Try me. The truth is, I'm expected to marry someone connected to a family with power and wealth equal to the Wallaces. Her jaw dropped. Seriously? Yes. I owe my family a great deal, and I intend to do what's expected of me. What about love? That's a modern concept and it's fine for the masses, but the masses? Are you listening to yourself? You sound like some prince from a royal family. He nodded. In a way I am. Love of family, loyalty to family are more important than my individual preferences. I can't imagine. She stared at him, unable to comprehend that kind of self-sacrifice. She would never have believed it if he hadn't told her himself. I adore my mother, but if she attempted to choose the man I marry, I would shut her down so fast. And there's the difference between us. His chest heaved. You need to get ready and I need to make a few calls. I'll meet you by the front door in 15 minutes. I'll be there. She drank her coffee quickly while she ate the cake, much faster than she would have liked. Then she finished getting ready, all the while trying to assimilate what Aidan had told her. To think of a 21st century man caving to that kind of manipulation boggled her mind. He was a person, not a chess piece. This was America, for crying out loud, the land of the free. He should be free to marry anyone he chose. But he seemed to have accepted his obligation without question. No matter how she turned the concept around in her mind, she couldn't make it fit with the strong, confident man she'd come to know. She wondered whether he was afraid of losing his inheritance and all that the Wallace fortune provided in the way of bennies. He did enjoy his perks. Still, from what she'd observed of his character so far, he was a man of honor. She doubted a loss of income would make him do something he didn't think was right. For whatever reason, he believed in this custom of allowing his family to dictate his marital future. In the meantime, she suspected he'd sown his share of wild oats. He enjoyed sex with a gusto that suggested plenty of experience with the endeavor. In that case, why didn't he want to sow a few more with her this weekend? He didn't, though. She'd have bet her next royalty check that he'd come into her bedroom with the express purpose of calling a halt to their fun and games. She'd barely beat him to the punch. The more she thought about that decision on his part, the happier she became. He decided to back off for the same reason she had. The sex had been too intense for both of them, while she was afraid of losing focus on her career. He was afraid of becoming so attached to her that he wouldn't be able to honor his duty to his family. Greatly cheered by that conclusion, she located her purse and her satchel containing her book signing materials before walking out into the living room. Exactly at the 15-minute mark he'd set, he paced in front of the unlit fireplace, his BlackBerry to his ear. The remnants of his breakfast sat on a tray on the coffee table. Curious, she took inventory. He'd had coffee too, but from the looks of the plate, he'd had steak and eggs instead of chocolate cake. Made sense. He was the big guy who would need to support all those gorgeous muscles with the right kind of fuel. She didn't mean to eavesdrop on his conversation, but short of retreating to the bedroom again, she couldn't very well help it. Oh hell, she might as well admit she'd been straining to hear what he was saying from the minute she'd realized he was on the phone. Years ago, she'd accepted the fact that writers were notorious eavesdroppers. She got some of her best story ideas that way. Add to that her natural curiosity about anything to do with Aidan, and she became the human equivalent of a wiretap. Sure, Nadia. We'll be at the bookstore about 1 this afternoon. I'd love to see you. We should have time for coffee during Emma's signing. See you then. He disconnected the call and turned to Emma. Ready? Yes. She fought the urge to ask him who Nadia was. He gestured with the BlackBerry. Somebody I've known ever since I was a kid. She's going to drop by the signing. Great. And she just knew that Nadia was a potential candidate for this arranged marriage deal. He'd known her since he was a kid, which meant the two families were close. Emma read the tabloids and she was aware that wealthy families socialized with other wealthy families, even if they lived in cities as far apart as New York and Chicago. Instantly Emma hated this Nadia person who was colluding with Aidan's family to imprison him in a loveless marriage. True, he was going along with it docilely, but apparently, he'd been brainwashed from a young age. The whole concept seemed just wrong. Wrong as it was, though, it was none of her business. Having one really steamy night of sex with a man didn't give her the right to meddle in his personal life. This situation wasn't a plot point in one of her books. She couldn't simply rewrite the script to suit her worldview. Yet she obsessed about the unfairness of it all during odd moments when she didn't have to concentrate on something else, like one of her 2 radio interviews or her morning TV appearance. Aidan accompanied her to all of them and stayed in the background. They didn't talk much in the car either. After the easy banter they'd shared on the plane and their sexual abandon with each other in the suite, their silences were awkward. Emma didn't know what to do about that. The day's schedule marched steadily toward the 1 o'clock bookstore event, to which Aidan had so graciously invited Nadia. Whatever. Maybe her last name was Rockefeller or DuPont. Emma secretly hoped Nadia would turn out to be a dull and colorless woman who could hardly wait to get her hands on a specimen the likes of Aidan. That would further justify Emma's indignation, to think of Aidan shackled to someone who would bore him to tears during their first week of married life. At the bookstore, Emma snagged another coffee drink to keep her courage up for the reading session ahead. She dreaded the reading portion of the event far more than the autograph session. Signing books and talking to readers was gratifying even if it wore her out. But listening to herself read her own words aloud was pure torture because she never got over the urge to edit her work even after it was finished. Still, she was expected to read, so she did. It wasn't that she never knuckled under to satisfy others, but she wasn't into self-sacrifice, which Aidan seemed to be. Ordering his entire life to further his family's ambitions made no sense to her. As 1 o'clock drew near, the prospect of reading before an audience took on extra significance because Nadia would be there. Nadia, the albatross around Aidan's neck. Emma tried to imagine that Nadia wasn't thrilled about the arrangement either, but any woman would take one look at Aidan and think to herself, I want some of that. Emma certainly had. As the time for the reading approached, Aidan stood to one side of the rows of chairs and talked with the bookstore manager. Emma pretended to scan the passage she would soon be reading while watching him from the corner of her. Yep, he was certifiably gorgeous. Nadia couldn't possibly be upset about her fate. With 5 minutes to go, the chairs had filled and newcomers were forced to stand. Emma was gratified by the turnout, which was a constant source of amazement to her. When she wrote a book alone in her loft, she had a difficult time imagining all these people reading it. But they did, and for that she was very grateful. Aidan hadn't made a move toward any of the women who'd taken a seat, so Emma didn't think Nadia had arrived yet. Then he turned, as if sensing the arrival of someone. It was the oddest thing, as if he knew she was coming before she even arrived. Emma felt a pang of something that just might have been jealousy. Maybe he had a bond with this childhood friend that was so strong he felt her before he saw her. Emma couldn't expect to compete with that. Or that. When Nadia rounded a bookshelf and started toward Aidan, Emma groaned softly in dismay. The woman was stunning. She moved like a runway model, and she had the figure of one too. Tall and fashionably slim she was, dressed in an elegant silver jacket and skirt that provided an eye-catching contrast to her long black hair. Gray eyes and thick lashes gave her an exotic look that any man would find intriguing. As Aidan gave her a hug, Emma felt as if someone had dunked her heart in ice water. These two obviously belonged to an exclusive club, one to which Emma would never be invited. Aidan wouldn't dread spending his life with this glorious creature. They were made for each other. Emma should count herself lucky that she'd been able to spend one night in Aidan's arms. Now that Nadia had shown up, Aidan might very well forget that. Emma existed. She had to laugh at herself, thinking this morning that she'd had a decision to make as to whether she'd have more sex with Aidan. It had never been up to her.